Hello and welcome. What you're about to hear is inspired by two viral stories that share one terrifying warning. We'll travel to Japan's Yamanashi Prefecture, home of the infamous Tunnel 9, and then to the remote village of Sanro. In Tunnel 9, witnesses report the phantom smell of burning rubber, a memory of an accident that never ends. In Sanro, locals hear a small bell, calling them toward a procession of faceless figures. Both legends warn that the light doesn't save you. We're about to find out why. Hit subscribe and let's explore the darkness. Story 1. Nyutban. Set up Tunnel 9, Manashi. The 7:14 a.m. express train from Shinjuku was aggressively normal. It smelled of lukewarm canned coffee, damp umbrellas, and the faint, sugary scent of someone's pocky breakfast. This was the environment where Mickey felt most herself. Anonymous, in motion, and plugged in. She was an ordinary character, a third-year visual communications major at a Tokyo university, defined less by her personality and more by her anxieties about her student loans and her fierce attachment to her camera gear. Beside her, her laptop was balanced precariously on her knees, the screen reflecting the grey, rain-slick sprawl of the city suburbs flying by. She was reviewing analytics from their channel's last stream, a rather dull exploration of an abandoned pachinko parlor in Chiba. View count dropped off hard after the 20-minute mark, Mickey mumbled, mostly to herself. We need a better retention hook. The hook, Kenta said, his voice muffled by the convenience store melon pan he was inhaling, is that the place was boring. No ghosts, no drama. People want stakes. He was slumped in the seat opposite her, all lanky limbs and a bright, obnoxious orange beanie. Kenta was a philosophy major, which meant he had a lot of opinions and very little practical skill, making him the group's official jester and resident skeptic. His purpose was simpler. He was there because his friends were there, and it beat studying Plato. The hook, Ren said, not looking up from his phone, is Tunnel 9. This is the one. Mickey. This will break us past 50,000 subs, I promise. Ren was their leader, the founder of their Tokyo After Dark Urbex channel. He was a history major, and his charisma was rooted in his intense, almost academic passion for forgotten places. For him, this wasn't a prank. It was a form of digital archaeology. He was meticulously scrolling through satellite images of the Yamanashi Prefecture, cross-referencing them with a hand-drawn map he'd bought online. And then there was Emmy. She sat next to the window, headphones on but not playing anything, just watching the city dissolve into farmland. She was a fine arts major, sensitive and quiet. And she was only here for one reason, Ren. She had agreed to this trip in a moment of bravery, hoping to share in his passion. But now, with every click-clack of the train tracks, her stomach tightened. She was reading a blog post on her phone, a crackpot conspiracy site detailing the 1986 incident. It says they never found the driver, Emmy said suddenly, her voice small. Kenta snorted. They found the bus, didn't they? Big yellow thing, full of, well, you know, how hard is it to find one guy? They say he's still in there, Emmy whispered, reading. They say the tunnel was sealed with him, and the children, still inside, that the echo. It doesn't sound right. That's why we're going, Ren said, finally looking up with a bright, confident smile. It's folklore. It's a modern legend. We're just going to document the site. Mickey will get some amazing atmospheric shots, and Kenta will make a few stupid jokes. We'll be in and out in an hour. It's safe. The train journey was filled with this mundane, relatable chatter. They debated the best place to get Hoto noodles after the shoot. Kenta and Mickey argued over whether the new signal booster was worth the price. Emmy anxiously reapplied her lip balm. They were just students on a day trip, armed with GoPros and snack food, playing at being adventurers. They were four normal people, wrapped in the safe, boring cocoon of public transit, hurtling toward a place that was anything but. This relatability was their brand. Their audience wasn't watching hardcore ghost hunters. They were watching themselves. They were watching 4 kids who could be their classmates, their friends, their siblings. The implicit message was always the same, the one that made their channels so compelling. This could happen to me. 2 hours later, the train was a distant memory. Their rented van, a rattling beige box that smelled of cigarettes and air freshener, protested as Ren navigated it up a winding, poorly maintained logging road deep in the Yamanashi Mountains. The normal was beginning to peel away. "Signal's gone," Mickey announced from the back, tapping her phone screen. "Stream relay is switching to the booster. Let's hope the satellite link holds." "It'll hold," Ren said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he dodged a pothole. "Man, this is really in the sticks," Kenta said, leaning his head out the window. "You sure this is the spot, Captain?" "Positive." They parked where the road dissolved into a muddy track. The air outside was different. The rain had stopped, but the forest was damp and unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, just the drip of water from the massive cedar trees. "Okay," Ren said, hopping out and unlocking the back. "Gear up, Mickey. Your primary camera. I'll take the high-intensity torch and the EMF. Kenta, you're on audio. Emmy, you have the spare batteries." They walked for 15 minutes, following Ren's map. The woods grew thicker, darker. Then they saw it. It wasn't just a tunnel, it was a scar. The entrance was a massive, rusted corrugated iron wall, bolted directly into the mountainside. Someone had spray-painted "Keep Out" in angry red kanji, the paint dripping down like blood. Below it, a smaller, faded government sign warned of structural instability. "Well," Kenta said, adjusting his microphone, "that's not very welcoming." "Look at this," Mickey said, already filming, her voice taking on the professional or hushed tone of their streams. She zoomed in on the ground near the gate. "The concrete apron is completely cracked. This whole thing is falling apart." Ren ignored her, running his hand along the edge of the metal sheet. "There's a gap. Down here, someone's pulled the bolts loose." As he bent down, the temperature plummeted. It wasn't a gradual chill. It was as if someone had opened a freezer door. A plume of icy vapor escaped Ren's mouth. "Whoa," Kenta whispered, his breath fogging too. "Instant winter." Emmy visibly shivered, pulling her jacket tight. "Ren, I don't like this. It feels wrong." "It's just a temperature differential." "Emmy," Ren said, his voice tight with excitement. "Mountain air trapped inside. It's perfect." "Mickey, are you rolling?" "Stream is live," Mickey confirmed, her camera light cutting a harsh white beam in the gloom. "We have 300 viewers. They're already asking what that sign says." "Let's give them a show." Ren slid his backpack off, preparing to crawl through the gap. Ren leads the way. "Mickey, you're right behind me. Kenta, you follow her. Emmy, you're the lookout. Stay close." One by one, they slipped through the gap, leaving the silent, living forest behind and entering a world of cold, dead concrete. The darkness inside was absolute. It was a heavy, oppressive black that swallowed their powerful flashlights, reducing them to small, trembling circles. The air was thick with the smell of rust, diesel fumes, and something else, something cold and metallic, like old pennies. "Okay, stream," Ren said, his voice booming in the enclosed space. "We are inside Tunnel 9. As you can see, it's completely dark. Temperature is incredibly cold, way colder than outside." "The echo," Emmy whispered, her voice trembling. Ren was right. The echo was wrong. His voice hit the walls and seemed to stick. It didn't bounce back clearly. It came back flat, distorted. "Ho kang di, vang kang silek." "Kenta, sound check," Mickey ordered, her camera panning across the graffiti-covered walls. "Check, check," Kenta said. His voice came back as check. Check. He forced a laugh. "Tough crowd. This place just eats sound." A sharp hiss filled Kenta's headphones. "Ah, signal's getting glitchy," he reported. Lots of static. Keep moving, Ren said. The tunnel curves up ahead. Ren Dan Dung, pushed forward. Mickey Ju Mai, followed, her lens capturing everything. She focused on the details for her B-roll, the way the water dripped from the ceiling in perfectly straight, slow lines, the curved walls. And that's when her light caught them. High up on the left wall, near the ceiling, were long, black streaks. Ren, light up here, she said. He pointed his torch. The streaks were thick, black rubber. Tire tracks, Ren breathed, narrating for the stream. They're so high. The bus must have rolled, flipped over completely. Ren, Emmy said. Her voice was a strained whisper. Emmy Batten. What is it? I want to go back, please. Emmy, we just got in, Kenta said. Though his usual humour was gone, Kenta Fartro. We haven't even seen a ghost yet. Stop it, Kenta. I'm serious. Guys, look, Mickey said. Her camera pointed at the ground. Half buried in the silt and grime near the wall was a piece of debris. It was a circular, rusted bus mirror. Incredible, Ren said, crouching beside it. This is from the 1986 incident. This is real. Mickey zoomed in. The cracked glass reflected the three of them. Ren, Kenta, and herself, all pale and wide-eyed in the camera light. For a split second, the angle of the broken glass caught Emmy, too, standing just behind Kenta, and just behind Emmy, a fifth reflection, small, distorted. Mickey blinked. It was gone. Just a trick of the light on the fractured, rusty glass. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't say anything. Ren, Emmy said again, her voice shaking so hard she could barely speak. She was pointing her own small flashlight at the wall, just a few feet from the mirror. What? Ren snapped, annoyed. On the soot-stained concrete, at the height of a small child's reach, was a handprint. It was perfectly clear. 5 small fingers, pressed flat against the wall. It wasn't an impression. It was made of fresh, wet, black, moi, soot, as if someone had dipped their hand in engine oil and just touched the wall. Kong ki lang bat thung, do te nyo ding moi. Silence. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water and the crackling static in Kenta's headphones. Tin Hiu Hing knew. It's wet, Kenta whispered, reaching out and hovering his fingers over it. How is that wet? Ren, for the first time, looked uncertain. His face was pale, and then, through the static, Mickey heard it. It was faint, but it was there, coming from deeper in the tunnel, the sound of a heavy vehicle, its wheels grinding on gravel, and underneath it, a soft, sibilant sound, the sound of a layered whispers, like a classroom of children being told to shh. Did you guys hear that? Mickey asked, her own voice barely audible. Hear what? Ren said, turning. Shh, Mickey commanded. They all stood still, frozen in the oppressive, icy dark. The sound of wheels grew closer. The whispers grew louder, clearer. They weren't in Japanese. They sounded like counting. Sichi, Hachi, Q. This is a joke, Kenta said, his voice cracking. Someone's in here with a speaker. Very funny. He shouted into the darkness. Hello, is anyone there? His voice rocketed down the tunnel. There, there, there. The echo came back, flat and dead, as before. But then, after the echo died, a new sound came from the darkness ahead. Not an echo, a reply, a small, clear voice. Ju, 10, as one. They heard it. Nu Kwai Cha Lo Te Buk Tung. Emmy screamed. Kenta dropped his microphone. Ren's high-intensity flashlight beam swung wildly, illuminating nothing but an empty, curving, concrete tomb. Mickey, cut the stream! Ren yelled. Cut the stream! But Mickey was frozen, her camera still recording as the video feed filled with a storm of white noise. The last thing the stream's 450 viewers saw before the connection died, was the image of the small, sooty handprint on the wall, and the last thing they heard was the sound of dozens of small, excited, whispering voices, all saying the same word at once. "Found you!" The air in the memorial room was not just quiet, it was heavy, suffocating. It was the sterile, oppressive silence of a place scrubbed clean of life, yet tasked with containing the totality of its loss. Taro stood in the doorway, the polished wood floor reflecting the weak, dying light of the late afternoon. He'd come to pay his respects, to finally close a loop that had been left frayed and unraveling for 20 years. But the room itself seemed to resist him. The first thing he noticed was the smell. It was a cloying combination of old, drying flowers and the sharp, ammonia-like scent of industrial floor wax. Beneath that, however, was something else, a faint metallic tang, almost like old pennies. Taro wrinkled his nose, attributing it to the aging brass fixtures, or perhaps the metal frames of the photographs that lined the far wall. Old buildings, especially schools left to the quiet care of a minimal staff, always had their own unique, unpleasant bouquets. He was just being overly sensitive, his nerves already on edge from the pilgrimage, but the smell was persistent, and it didn't belong. It was a cold, inorganic scent that seemed to cut through the stillness. A prelude. He stepped inside, his soft-soled shoes making an embarrassingly loud squeak on the pristine floor. He flinched, feeling like a trespasser. The wall to his left was a grid of smiling faces, the official school portraits of the class that never graduated. Young, bright, frozen. He walked toward them, his hands deep in his pockets, the chill of the room seeping into his coat. He found the face he was looking for, Hannah. Her smile was forced, her eyes looking slightly past the camera. As he stared at her portrait, a low, rhythmic sound began. It was a vibration, more felt than heard, like a heavy vehicle idling on a distant road. The main highway was miles down the mountain. Taro dismissed it. It must be the building's ancient heating system, the boiler kicking to life in the basement 3 floors down. It was autumn, after all. The nights were getting cold. The sound was just a mundane function of the building. The rumble, however, wasn't coming from the floor. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. It wasn't the clanking of pipes. It was the deep, thrumming pulse of a diesel engine, and it was steady, unchanging. Taro tried to ignore it. Focusing on Hannah, he whispered a quiet apology, a few words he'd rehearsed on the long train ride up, but the sound was intrusive, a low-frequency hum that vibrated in his teeth. Another sound joined it, a soft, methodical shuff, shuff, shuff. It was indistinct, like canvas brushing against canvas. Or perhaps footsteps, many of them, but they were oddly synchronized, rising and falling with the rhythm of the idling engine. He paused, listening. A janitor, maybe, pushing a wide dust mop down the adjacent hallway. But the timing was too perfect, too aligned with the engine's thrum. He shook his head. He was tired. He was grieving. His mind was playing tricks, connecting disparate sounds, trying to make a pattern where none existed. It was just the wind, or the building settling. The shuffling wasn't in the hall. It was in the room with him. It sounded like small feet in canvas shoes, shifting nervously on a metal floor, the sound of children on a school bus. The engine sound grew marginally louder. The air pressure in the room seemed to change, becoming denser. Taro felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to leave. This was a mistake. He shouldn't have come. He looked away from Hannah's portrait, intending to turn back to the door. As his gaze swept across the wall, the other student portraits seemed to change. It was a flicker, a trick of the low light, but he could have sworn their smiles tightened. Their eyes, all of them, shifted to look directly at him. He froze, his heart leaping into his throat. "No," he whispered. He blinked hard, staring intently. The faces were as they were, static, smiling, printed on glossy paper. It was a classic parallax effect, a common optical illusion, the curved glass of the frames, the angle of the light, his own movement. That's all it was. He was letting the oppressive atmosphere get to him. But for that one instant, the room had been full of witnesses. The static faces of the dead had become a silent, judging audience. He took a half step back, his breathing becoming shallow. The engine noise was undeniable now. It was the sound of a heavy, idling bus, and it wasn't outside. It was right here. The floor vibrated with it. The single fluorescent light panel above him, which had been casting a weak, sickly yellow glow, began to flicker. It buzzed once, twice, a harsh, electric st. Bad wiring, he muttered, the word a charm against the dark. Just old wiring. He looked up at the failing light, annoyed. The buzz was not random. It was keeping time with the shuff, shuff, shuff of the footsteps. A third, percussive element in a symphony that was building only for him. With a final, violent pop, the light snapped off. The room was plunged into an absolute, suffocating darkness. It was a primordial black, a black so total it felt solid. Taro gasped, flinging his hands out. He couldn't see the door. He couldn't see the wall. He couldn't see his own hand inches from his face. The sounds rushed in to fill the vacuum, the heavy, chugging diesel idle, the restless shuffling of feet. They were loud now, immediate. The smell of diesel fumes, sharp and acrid, flooded his nostrils. It was overwhelming. The unmistakable, unburnt exhaust of an old engine. He coughed, his eyes watering. This was dangerous. The building's heating system must have cracked. A furnace leak. He was breathing in poison. He fumbled frantically for his phone, his fingers numb and clumsy. The smell wasn't coming from a vent. It was coming from all directions at once, as if the very air had been replaced. He found his phone, his thumb mashing the power button. The screen flared to life, a small, modern rectangle of blue-white light. It was a pathetic defense, casting a weak cone that illuminated almost nothing. He pointed it at the wall where the portraits had been. The portraits were gone. The wall was not a wall. It was a dark, ribbed metal surface, slick with condensation. Where the smiling photos of the children had been, there were now just dark, grime-caked windows, reflecting his own terrified face. He was looking at the inside of a bus. No. What? He stumbled back, convinced he'd been turned around. He spun, panning the weak light. The polished wooden floor was gone. He was standing on a ribbed rubber mat, sticky with something he couldn't see. The door he'd entered through was gone, replaced by the metal and glass folding door of a bus. The room had not changed. It had been replaced. The memory had swallowed the reality. And then, the most impossible detail. A thud and a sharp crack of splitting plaster came from behind him, from the wall that was no longer there. He spun back. His light caught it. A single, low-backed, vinyl-upholstered bus seat was sitting in the middle of the aisle. It was torn, the yellow foam padding bursting through the green vinyl. It wasn't there a second ago. As he watched, he saw the jagged hole in the memorial room's real plaster wall, from which it had apparently fallen, as if it had been ripped out of memory. This was not real. This was a dream, a hallucination. He was having a psychotic break, brought on by grief and stress. He squeezed his eyes shut, then snapped them open. The phone light was real. The phantom seat was real. The smell of diesel was real. The laws of physics had just been demonstrably broken. The barrier between then and now, between this place and that place, was gone. He was shaking violently. His phone held out like a talisman. The engine sound was deafening. The shuffling feet were the sounds of children all around him, invisible in the oppressive dark just beyond his tiny circle of light. A voice, a small, clear, curious voice, spoke from the darkness just to his left. It was so close he felt the puff of air. "Sensei, is the bus coming?" Taro screamed. He fell backward, scrambling away, his phone beam bouncing wildly. "Who's there? Who said that?" He'd thought he was alone. It was a child a child hiding in the dark, a cruel, terrible prank. Stop it! This isn't funny. The voice was not a prank. It was thin, ethereal, and full of a sad, patient expectation, and it had called him Sensei. He was not a teacher. Please, he begged, his voice a ragged sob. He panned the light around. Nothing. Just the empty, phantom bus aisle, the single seat, and the overwhelming dark. Two brilliant white lights appeared on the far wall, the front windshield. They weren't on the wall. They were through the wall. Two perfect circles of blinding white light, cutting through the darkness, painting the inside of the bus in stark, terrifying relief. Ang den ser, moho lautoi. The headlights. This was his mind, finally shattering. There was no other explanation. It was a migraine aura. It was a stroke. It was anything but what it looked like. The lights were getting brighter. An engine was no longer idling. It was accelerating. A high, whining roar joined the diesel thrum. The bus was no longer waiting. It was moving. And then, absolute silence. The engine roar vanished. The shuffling feet stopped. The headlights died. The diesel smell was gone. For one long, terrible, pressurized second, the world ceased to exist. Taro was suspended into vacuum, his own heart the only sound, hammering against his ribs. The silence was the intake of breath. The sound was not a sound. It was a physical impact, a cataclysmic, deafening shriek of metal tearing metal, a concussive boom that shattered the world. Taro was thrown from his feet as if by a bomb. His phone flew from his grasp, skittering across the floor and extinguishing, plunging him back into total, agonizing darkness. He landed hard on his back, the air exploding from his lungs. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't see. He was deafened by the ringing in his ears. He was dead. He had to be. The crash had not happened 20 years ago. It had just happened again. And he was in it. He gasped, air finally returning. He was alive. The silence of the memorial room rushed back in, but it was different. It was now the silence after the explosion. His ears popped, and then two new sensations. A hot, wet spray that misted his face, a hissing sound, the sound of a ruptured radiator, and the smell, moisang chai, the smell of burning gasoline. It was not the memory of a smell. It was rich, fresh, and terrifying. It was the smell of fuel spilled over a hot engine. He scrambled backward on the polished wooden floor. The floor was back, clawing at the smooth surface, choking, gagging on the fumes. Fire, fire, he whispered. He was in the memorial room. It was dark, but it smelled of gasoline. The memory was not just an echo, it was a stain. It was an event still happening, trapped in this room, waiting for an audience. He found his phone. Its screen cracked and thumbed it on. The room was the room. Polished floor, plaster walls. The wall of portraits was back. The children smiling their static, innocent smiles. The phantom bus seat was gone, but the air was thick with the stench of burnt fuel. Taro lay on the floor, hyperventilating, staring at the ceiling. The memorial plaque by the door, the one he'd read on the way in. He remembered the words. The date, the accident, the fire that followed. He realized the truth of this place, the truth of the memory. It wasn't over. It had never ended. It never stopped burning. The formula for this section is precise. Strange events must repeat. Their intensity must escalate. And crucially, no one else must notice. This is the architecture of psychological isolation, the foundation upon which true dread is built. For Ren, it began subtly. The cultural excursion bus was a necessary evil, a mandatory part of the architectural conference in Kyoto. It was currently navigating a winding, two-lane road through the dense, damp forests of the Kii Peninsula. Rain lashed the windows in intermittent, angry bursts. Inside, the air was stuffy. smelling of wet wool and the faint, sweet tang of diesel exhaust. His colleagues, Laura and Mark, were chattering about structural integrity and material sourcing. Ren, wedged against the vibrating window, felt a disconnect he'd been nursing for days. Japan always did this to him. It was a homeland he'd never known, a place that existed only in his parents' hushed, reverent tones. He was Rensuke Mori on his passport, but he was Ren, an architect from Chicago. The dissonance was a low-grade headache. The first event was a smell. It wasn't the diesel. This was sharper, acrid, the unmistakable scent of burnt plastic and something oily, something organic. He straightened, sniffing. "You guys smell that?" Laura paused. "Smell what? Yuji's hair gel?" "No, like something's burning." Mark sniffed the air theatrically. "Just exhaust. Man, this bus is probably older than we are." The smell faded. Ren blamed the hypnotic effect of the windshield wipers. Thwack swipe, thwack swipe. 10 minutes later, it returned, stronger this time. He felt a phantom heat against his cheek, as if someone had opened a furnace door. He pressed his hand to the window. It was cool, slick with rain. He shook his head, burying the sensation. Then came the sound. Beneath the engine's rumble and the hiss of the tires on wet asphalt, he heard it. A faint, off-key melody, a children's song. It was fractured, like a radio signal struggling to lock on. Kagome, Kagome. He leaned forward, straining to hear. It was there, then gone. "Ren, you're white as a sheet," Laura noted, her voice a mix of concern and mild impatience. "You need to sleep on these rides, not stare out the window looking for samurai." "I thought I heard." He trailed off. "Nothing. Just tired." But he wasn't just tired, he was unnerved. The bus rounded another sharp bend, the tires groaning. The tour guide, Yuji, a painfully cheerful man with a microphone, announced. "And next, we will be passing through the Inunaki Tunnel. It is a very old tunnel, from the 1970s. Many local stories about this one." A few polite oohs rippled through the bus. Ren felt his stomach clench. He didn't want to go into a tunnel. As the arched, moss-stained concrete maw of the tunnel loomed, the strange events amplified. The darkness inside wasn't a relief. It was a compression. The sodium-orange lights flickered past, rhythmic, hypnotic. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of the bus crossing the road dividers. The smell of burning plastic was suddenly, overwhelmingly, present. It was no longer a phantom. It was thick, gagging. Ren coughed, pulling the collar of his shirt over his nose. "My God, that's awful," he muttered, looking at Laura. She was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by its blue-white glow. She hadn't noticed. "What is?" she asked absently. "The smell. It's like burning hair." She finally looked up, annoyed. "Ren, it's a tunnel. It's called exhaust. Are you having a panic attack?" His heart hammered. He was alone in this. The realization was colder than the rain. The children's song returned. Kagome, Kagome. It wasn't a radio. It was in the bus. No, it was in his ear. A child's reedy voice, whispering the tune. Thump, 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 thump. He squeezed his eyes shut. Jet lag, fatigue, the guide's stupid ghost story. A small, cold hand touched his arm. Ren's eyes snapped open. The seat next to him was empty. There was no one there. But he had felt it. He could still feel the lingering cold spot on his sleeve. "Yuji!" he called out, his voice sounding too loud, too thin. Can you turn up the lights?" Yuji's voice crackled over the PA. "They are at maximum, sir. It is just a very dark tunnel. We will be out in 3 minutes." Thump, 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 thump. The orange lights began to flicker, faster now, creating a dizzying strobe effect. Flicker. The bus was as it was, Colleagues on their phones. Flicker. The windows were fogged. Tiny handprints pressed against the glass from the inside. Flicker. Laura. Scrolling. Flicker. The seat in front of him was gone, replaced by the singed, buckled metal of a bulkhead. The bus shuddered violently. Not a vibration, but a deep, structural groan. The thump-thump of the dividers was gone, replaced by the agonizing shriek of metal on metal. The lights died. Absolute darkness. The bus slammed to a halt, throwing him forward against the seat. Laura screamed, a real scream, cut short. Then, silence. A heavy, profound silence, filled only by his own ragged breathing. "Hello?" he whispered. "Laura? Mark?" A new light bloomed outside his window, not the orange of the tunnel, but the flickering, hungry yellow of a chemical fire. The world outside was no longer a tunnel. They were sideways, nested within the mangled, burning chassis of another bus. His window looked directly into the ruined interior of the other vehicle, a school bus, twisted into a skeletal frame. The rain had stopped. Here, only ash fell. A distant, warped wee-woo-wee-woo sound echoed from somewhere deep in the wreckage, a sound that seemed to pull and stretch, melting until it was no longer a siren, but a low, continuous, multi-layered chorus of human agony, a bed of screams that vibrated in his teeth. A figure was moving in the wreckage. It pulled itself from the driver's seat of the other bus. He was a silhouette against the flames, a man defined by what was missing. He was half burned. His uniform melted to his skin like black wax. He stumbled, lurching through the debris, until he was at Ren's window. He raised a blackened, skeletal hand and pressed it to the glass. The sizzle of his flesh meeting the cool pane was sickeningly loud. One eye, milky and boiled, found Ren's. The man's jaw worked, and a voice like dry leaves scraping concrete rasped through the glass, through the metal, through Ren's very bones. "Dang Theo An Sang," he whispered, the Vietnamese words a shocking, intimate intrusion. "Don't follow the light. No Van Chai." It's still burning. Ren was paralyzed, his mind a void of pure, crystalline terror. The burning man's gaze drifted down, past Ren, to the floor of the wreck. A clipboard, miraculously unburned, lay flipped open near a shattered gearshift. Ren's eyes followed. He could read the name, typed neatly on a roster sheet. Tro Jiang, teaching assistant. Rensuke Mori. The world stopped. Rensuke Mori. That was him. The trip. The school trip he'd been hired for 20 years ago. The summer before he'd left for America. He'd cancelled. He'd told them he had the flu, a terrible fever. He remembered the phone call, the coordinator's annoyed voice. But it wasn't the flu. He'd had a bad feeling, a nightmare so vivid, of fire, and a tunnel, and small hands pounding on glass, that he'd stayed in his tiny apartment phone off, pretending to be sick. He had been so relieved when he heard the news. A terrible accident. All lost. He'd felt a prickle of guilt, quickly buried under the profound, selfish joy of survival. He'd lied. He had abandoned them. He had let someone else go in his place. Who had they found? Did this burning man think he was Rensuke, or did he know? He wasn't Ren, the successful architect. He was Rensuke, the coward, the one who ran, the one who knew. The driver's hand slipped from the glass, leaving a greasy, black smear. He dissolved back into the fire. The scream bed intensified, filling his head. He couldn't breathe. He had to get out. He tore his eyes from the window, turning to his own bus, to his colleagues, to reality. The bus was no longer empty. Save for his colleagues, every seat was full. They were filled with children, dozens of them, in matching blue and white school uniforms. They were pale, their hair and clothes unnervingly neat, as if untouched by the inferno raging just outside. They were all just sitting, hands folded in their laps. Ren opened his mouth, but no sound came out. As one, the The children turned their heads to look at him. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, silent and fluid. He saw their faces, and he saw their eyes. They were not eyes, they were pits, empty, endless. Black holes that drank the firelight and offered nothing. De nu ho so. They stared at him. The silence in the bus was absolute. Then, a voice. It was not one voice, but all of them. A collective, whispering, resonant chant that came from everywhere at once. It was not angry. It was not sad. It was a simple, terrible statement of fact. Sensei, you left us. The world snapped back. A violent lurch, the shriek of brakes. The bus emerged from the Inunaki tunnel into the grey, rainy daylight. Ren gasped, choking, as if surfacing from a deep dive. The air was clean, cool. The smell of fire was gone. The bus was normal. Laura was 2 rows ahead, putting her phone away. Mark was asleep, snoring softly. See? Yuji's voice chirped over the PA. Out in no time, very safe. Laura turned in her seat, looking back at him. Her expression shifted from casual to disturbed. My God, Ren, she said, her voice low. You look like you've seen a ghost. I told you these old tunnels were creepy. Ren could only stare. He raised a trembling hand to his face. His collar was damp. He looked at the window beside him. The glass was clean, streaked only with rain, but when he held his fingers to his nose, he could still smell it. Smoke. They spilled out of the blackness, collapsing onto the gravel apron of the tunnel's exit. The air in Tunnel 9 had been a physical weight, a thick, sulfuric poison that smelled of rust and something anciently cold. This new air was thin, damp, and sharp, and it offered no relief. They heaved in ragged, painful gulps, their hearts hammering a desperate, panicked rhythm against their ribs. They were on their hands and knees, spitting the taste of old pennies and spoiled meat from their mouths. For one fragile, crystalline second, there was silence. The oppressive, sentient void of the tunnel was gone, replaced by the natural, empty sound of a desolate railway line at twilight. They had survived. They were out. Then, a sound. Ting, ting. It was small, clear, and metallic. A sound that had no place here. One of them looked up, her dirt-smeared face a mask of pale terror. She was standing not 10 feet away, positioned perfectly between them and the path to freedom. They hadn't escaped. They had merely been permitted to leave. At the mouth of the tunnel, Kobe Trongdongfuk waited. She was just a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8, dressed in an old-fashioned school uniform. The pleats of her skirt were sharp, her white blouse impossibly bright in the dying purple light. She was a photograph of a nightmare, utterly still. Then, her head moved. Dao Ning! It tilted slowly to the right, a deliberate, inquisitive motion that ended with a soft, wet click of vertebrae. The angle was impossible, a 90-degree cant that should have snapped her neck. She stared at them. Her face was smooth and pale, her lips a bloodless line. But her eyes, Ang Mat Trong Toi, they were not eyes. They were deep, black pits, voids that seemed to drink the twilight from the sky. There were no pupils, no irises, no whites, just 2 polished orbs of absolute nothing. To look into them was to feel your soul being siphoned out, drawn into the same suffocating darkness they had just fled. Hanging from her small but pale wrist was the source of the sound. A small brass bell on a red string. It continued its gentle sway. Ting, ting, ting. Though the air was dead calm, the sound was clean, sharp, and it sliced directly into their minds, as if summoned by the bell. The wind finally rose. It rushed past them, flowing back into the tunnel as if the darkness were inhaling, and the wind carried a new sound. Gio Mangtheo Huk Hatsei Bus Tiuni. It was a children's song, faint and tinny, a distorted, looping recording. The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The cheerful, innocent melody twisted in the desolate air, becoming a grotesque mockery. It was the sound of a childhood murdered and worn as a mask. The characters were frozen, the adrenaline that propelled them from the tunnel turning to ice water in their veins. They were utterly, comprehensively powerless. This was not an escape. This was an audience. The violence was not physical. It was an assault. The sound of the bell and the sound of the bus song intensified, not in volume, but in presence. They became psychic shrapnel, a looping, agonizing rhythm that hammered at their skulls, drowning out all thought. They clapped their hands to their ears, but it didn't stop. The sound was already inside. They were endangered, trapped not by walls, but by a moment. The realization settled over them, a final cold truth voiced on the wind. When memory doesn't fade, the living are just lost guests. They were the guests, and they were terminally lost. This moment, this bridge between the tunnel and the world, was an eternity. Their struggle was meaningless. Where memory burns, time is just fuel. The girl took one silent step forward. The gravel did not crunch under her polished shoe. The bell stopped. The song stopped. The world held its breath. She opened her mouth. Smash to black. A beat of pure, terrifying silence. Then, the sudden, deafening roar of a tropical downpour. The sound of rain, SFX of the Philippines, hammering on a tin roof somewhere far, far away. The memory is still burning, and the rain won't put it out. If you want to see what happens when the silence breaks, comment below with what you think she's about to say. And make sure you subscribe so you don't get left behind in the dark. Story 2, Philippines Setup Road of the Dead, San Ro. The air on the eve of All Saints' Day was not filled with reverence. It was thick with a humid, oppressive weight. Marco felt it clinging to his barong as he gunned the engine of his tricycle, the two-stroke motor whining in protest against the muddy incline of San Ro. This was his last run, the Huling Biahe. He'd promised himself, promised his Lola. He would be home to light their own candles. But the fare had been good, a desperate family rushing to beat the cemetery curfew. Now he was alone, taking the road of the dead back as a shortcut. It was a stupid, macho decision, one born of exhaustion. Everyone knew you didn't take San Ro after dark, especially not during Undas. This was the time of Kaluluwa, when the veil thinned and the souls, both the remembered and the forgotten, walked all day. The main highways had been choked with processions, families carrying bundles of food, guitars, and fistfuls of candles, turning the graveyards into bright, noisy festivals of remembrance. Here, there was only the percussive drumming of rain on the canvas roof and the lonely slice of his headlight cutting the dark. The first sign was the light, the single sodium-orange lamppost at the cemetery's main gate, a post that had been dark for a decade. Flickered, it sputtered, buzzed, and then held a steady, sickly glow. Marco slowed, his foot easing off the accelerator. The gate itself was the second sign. The massive, wrought iron puerta, always chained and padlocked by the barangay tanods, was open, not just unlocked, but swung wide, a gaping black mouth inviting the road in. He should have turned around, he should have backed the tricycle up, navigated the three-point turn on the narrow road, and taken the long way. But he was mesmerized, his gaze fixed on the darkness past the gate. That's when he saw her. She was standing just at the edge of his headlight's throw, where the light began to surrender to the rain. A child, a little girl, no older than 7, in a simple white dress that was already soaked through, clinging to her small frame. She was just standing there. "Hey, Ineng!" Marco yelled, braking hard. The tricycle skidded, the sidecar fishtailing in the slick mud. "It's late, Umuwi Kana. Where are your parents?" The girl didn't move. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the sound of the rain. He squinted. wiping condensation from the inside of his windscreen. "Miss, are you lost?" He saw her head tilt, a small, bird-like motion, and then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a high, sweet giggle. Hick, hick, hick. It was the last sound he ever wanted to hear. The sound didn't come from the girl. It came from inside the sidecar. Marco's blood didn't just run cold, it evaporated. He froze, his hands locked on the handlebars. The giggle stopped, cut off abruptly. It was replaced by a new sound, a long, wet, sighing breath. Ha! The source was the same, the empty passenger seat right next to him. He refused to look. He jammed the key into the ignition, his knuckles white and twisted. Click. He twisted again. Click, click, whir. Nothing. The engine was dead, stone cold. "No, no, no. Diosko," he whispered, the prayer catching in his throat. The girl on the road hadn't moved, but he didn't need to see her anymore. He could feel her. The temperature in the tricycle plummeted. His breath plumed in front of his face. The air grew heavy, thick with the phantom scent of melted wax and dying champaca flowers. He risked a glance at the passenger seat. It was no longer empty. There was no form, no person, just evidence. A small puddle of milky, semi-translucent wax was slowly congealing on the vinyl. As he watched, another drop of hot wax spattered onto the seat, sizzling against the rainwater. St! He looked up. There was nothing above the seat but the canvas roof. The radio, a cheap AM unit he'd salvaged, crackled to life. It wasn't tuned to any station, just a wall of hissing static. Then, through the noise, a melody began to drift. It was faint, tinny, and broken, a music box, a lullaby. It sounded horribly old, recorded on mono, with a long 2-second decay on every note that made it sound like it was playing in a vast, empty, concrete hall. Ili, ili, tulog anai. It was a Visayan lullaby. Go to sleep, little one. Underneath the melody, a new sound emerged, a low mid-frequency drone, a constant vibrating hum that Marco felt in his teeth. It was the sound of the static solidifying. Panic, cold and absolute, seized his lungs. He was trapped. This thing, this kaluluwa, it wasn't just haunting the road. It was in the cab with him. Then came the final horror. The front wheel, with the engine dead, the tricycle immobile. The front wheel began to spin. It started slowly, a lazy whir, 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 turning backward, kicking up small spatters of mud. It accelerated, faster and faster until it was a blurred, humming disc, screaming in the night air. The entire tricycle began to shiver, vibrating violently with the impossible motion. That was the sound that broke him, not the girl, not the wax, but the mechanical violation of the wheel. Marco screamed. It was a raw, jagged sound. He fumbled for the door latch, his fingers slipping on the wet plastic. He threw his shoulder against the flimsy door and fell out, landing hard on his hands and knees in the deep, sucking putik. He didn't look back. He just ran. This was the consequence, the payment for his arrogance, for tempting the spirits on their most holy night. He scrambled to his feet, his boots finding no purchase. The rain was a solid wall of water, blinding him. The sound of the spinning wheel was a dentist's drill in his skull. And the lullaby. Diosko. The lullaby was everywhere. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was in the trees, in the rain, in his own pulse. Wala diri imong nanay. Your mother isn't here. Lies, he shrieked, clawing his way up the muddy embankment. Ihum! Leave me alone! He could hear the tricycle behind him. Not the engine, but the high-pitched whine of the wheel, and a new sound, the scrape of metal on gravel. It was moving. It was dragging itself along the road after him. He ran, fueled by a terror so pure it was almost transcendental. He wasn't a man anymore. He was just a prey animal, a bundle of raw nerves fleeing the predator. He burst through a curtain of hanging vines at the edge of the road, tumbling down a short, sharp incline. He landed hard, his right hand smashing against something sharp and buried, a cross, a small wooden grave marker, rotten and forgotten. At the edge of the cemetery property, a sliver of wood, cold and wet, punched deep into the palm of his hand. He cried out, a wet, pathetic sound. He pushed himself up, his hand throbbing, and kept running. The lullaby seemed to fade, consumed by the sound of his own ragged breathing and the thud of his heart. He ran until his lungs were fire and his legs were jelly. He didn't stop until he saw the distant, welcoming lights of the barangay checkpoint, a small, warm square of civilization in the overwhelming dark. He stumbled into the light, collapsing in front of the two stunned tanods, sitting under a leaky awning, their coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. "Marco, anong nangyari sa'yo?" one of them asked, grabbing his shoulder. Marco couldn't speak. He just pointed back into the darkness, his whole body shaking in uncontrollable spasms. He was covered in mud, his face a mask of terror. The tanod looked at his hand. "You're bleeding." Marco looked down. Blood was welling from a deep, ugly puncture in his palm. It was dark, almost black in the orange light, but the pain from the wound was nothing. It was a different sensation that held his attention, a burning, on his back, just below his left shoulder blade. His shirt felt like it was melting. He reached back, his trembling fingers touching his skin. A small, perfectly circular patch of his shirt was gone, seared away, and on his skin. He felt it. It was waxy. He frantically tried to rub it off, but the substance just smeared, clinging to his skin like a hot, chemical paste. It wasn't a burn from a fire. It was a burn from a cold, spiritual fire, a mark. He had been touched, claimed. The physical scars, the splintered wood in his palm, the waxy, round burn on his back would heal, or at least they would close. But the mental scar was a gaping wound that would never scab over. It was the sound, as the tanods helped him to his feet, wrapped a blanket around him, and gave him a cup of lukewarm, sugary coffee. He heard it, under the sound of their concerned voices, under the static of their small walkie-talkie. He heard the faint, tinny echo of the lullaby. "Kato satinda, bakal, papai." She went to the store to buy bread. He clapped his uninjured hand over his ear, but the sound was already inside. It had nested in his memory, a permanent parasite, the AM static, the 2.0 second decay, the oppressive low-mid drone. He would hear it in every silent room, in every rainstorm for the rest of his life. They got him home. His Lola wept, clutching her rosary and rubbing Asita de Manzanilla on his forehead, trying to ward off the Masamang hangin, evil wind that had clearly possessed him. But it wasn't wind. Marco sat on his banig mat, shaking. He had escaped. He was alive, but he had not survived. A part of him was still back on San Ro, trapped in that tricycle with the spinning wheel and the faceless girl. He knew he would never drive again. The tricycle was gone. It belonged to the road now. It belonged to her. He had run, and he had lived. But it was the barest definition of the word. He had survived the encounter, but he had a chilling, absolute certainty that the encounter was not finished with him. The burn on his back was a brand. The lullaby in his head was a summons. He had escaped the place, but he would never, ever be free of it. He closed his eyes, and all he could see was a spinning wheel. All he could hear was a child's song. He had barely survived, and the part of him that did survive would forever be looking over its shoulder, waiting for the static to rise and the lullaby to begin again. The footage is monochrome, filmed through a curtain of tropical rain. The timestamp ticks with digital precision in the lower left corner. 21:33:04. Headlights, distorted by the wet lens, swim into view. They are moving too fast for the conditions. 21:33:06. The headlights swerve, painting a frantic arc across the glistening, empty asphalt of the provincial highway. They are avoiding something that isn't there. 21:33:07. The car, Marco's rental sedan clips the shoulder. The impact is unseen, but the result is instantaneous. The vehicle begins a horrifying, graceful pirouette, a slow-motion tumble of metal and glass. 21:33:08. The feed dissolves into a blizzard of digital static. A harsh, screaming CHKS sound that overtakes the recorder's audio. 21:33:11. The feed returns for a single, frozen frame. The car is on its roof, a crumpled ruin. The rain seems to hang suspended, but the corruption remains, a faint, man-shaped blur. A shadow of smeared data stands by the driver's side door. It is a ghost in the machine, a smudge on the lens. CCTV only recorded the blur, but Marco, hanging upside down in the dark, saw the entire procession. The world did not end in a scream of tearing metal. It ended in silence. The violent physics of the crash, the spin, the impact, the shattering glass seemed to happen to someone else. In a different room, Marco was suspended, not by his seatbelt, but by a profound, sudden stillness. The sound of the rain had stopped. The hiss of the airbag deflating was gone. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic tink-tink-tink of cooling metal. He tasted copper. His head throbbed. He was alive. He tried to move, to check his limbs, but a cold deeper than the rain was seeping into the car. It wasn't the cold of the night air. It was the cold of a tomb. Then he heard it. Not footsteps on gravel, but a sound like 1,000 feet shod in soft leather, walking on dry leaves. A communal, shuffling whisper. He turned his head, vision swimming. Through the shattered spiderweb of the driver's side window, he saw the road. It was no longer a road. The prompt's nut tawak wasn't a physical earthquake. It was a perceptual tear. The asphalt had become a conduit. The world he knew, the solid, dependable, rain-slicked highway, had split open, revealing a reality pulsing just beneath its skin. Where the center line should have been, there was now a river of light, thousands upon thousands of candles, held by thousands upon thousands of hands, drifted past his wrecked car. They moved in a silent, dense column, a procession of figures walking from one darkness into another. They had no faces. Their features were smooth, indistinct voids, like sculptures worn down by a century of wind. They were men, women, and children, dressed in clothes that seemed to slide between decades. A barong from the 70s, a simple farmer's tunic, a modern t-shirt. They were everyone, and they were no one. They clutched their candles with purpose, their gaze fixed on a destination only they could see. This was the Calçada Mga Patay, the road of the dead. Marco watched, paralyzed, his journalistic mind frantically trying to categorize, to document, to understand, while the animal part of his brain simply screamed. The procession flowed around his car as if it were a stone in a stream, the spectral light of their candles casting a sick, flickering glow on the cabin's interior. He was an observer, a witness to the impossible. Then, one of them stopped. She stepped out of the flow, the river of souls parting around her. It was the little girl, the one from the photos, the one from the blurry village sighting. Her features, unlike the others, were visible, but blurred, as if seen through a pane of frosted glass. She was the only point of clarity in the faceless crowd. She walked directly to his window, ignoring the mangled steel. She knelt, her small, indistinct form filling his view. The cold intensified, burning his skin. She stared, not at his injuries, but directly into his eyes. There was no pity, no malice, only recognition. And then she spoke. Her voice wasn't a sound, but a thought planted directly in his skull, clear as a bell, cutting through his shock and pain. Marco, not Mr., not help. His name, a name she had no way of knowing. The foundation of his reality crumbled. This was not a random haunting. This was not a story he had found. This was an appointment. The girl's voice, the simple, impossible utterance of his name, was the key. It didn't just unlock his fear, it unlocked his memory. It forced him to look back, as the prompt demanded, to connect the trauma of this night with the origin of all his nights. His mind was torn from the wreck. The smell of ozone and wet metal from the crash was suddenly, violently replaced by another smell: gasoline, stale cigarette smoke, the musky scent of his father's old leather jacket. He is 10 years old, sitting in the passenger seat. The wipers squeak rhythmically against the windshield, fighting a different rain, on a different continent. 2 decades ago, his father is driving, one hand on the wheel, the other drumming on the dash to a song on the radio. "It's just a little further. Marco, we'll be there soon," his father says, his voice a warm rumble. Marco sees it first. The truck, hydroplaning, its trailer jackknifing across the median. He screams. His father yanks the wheel. The world becomes a vortex of sound and light. The crunch of metal, the explosive pop of the airbag, the shattering of glass. Silence. Marco is fine, protected by the passenger side. But his father... He crawls out of the broken window. The rain is cold. He stands on the wet pavement, trembling, and he sees her, the same girl. She is standing on the shoulder, untouched by the chaos, watching, not watching the wreck, watching him. A single figure breaks from the tree line. A man, faceless, a smooth void. He walks to his father, still slumped in the car. The figure extends a hand. Marco watches, paralyzed by a child's incomprehension, as his father's light, his essence, is drawn from his body. His father stands, confused, and is led by the hand into the trees. The girl watches Marco. She nods. Just once, a promise, an appointment. The memory hits him with the force of a physical blow. The whiteout began. It wasn't just a girl. It was the girl. It wasn't just a procession. It was the procession. All the earlier clues, all the static, all the blurry footage from this case. It all made sense. The static wasn't a glitch. It was the seam. It was the sound of two realities scraping against each other. The technological failures, the corrupted files. They were the artifacts of a world trying and failing to document something that didn't obey its laws. His life, his obsession with the unexplained, his grief-fueled drive that his mother called unhealthy. It wasn't a choice, it was a summons. He hadn't been chasing ghosts. He had been walking a path laid out for him by a faceless man and a blurry girl on a rain-slicked night 2 decades ago. He was never investigating his father's death. He was subconsciously trying to find where his father went. He looked back at the girl, his vision blurring. The whiteout was accelerating. The Anlua Bung Trang, the white-hot flare, wasn't just the car's electronics shorting out. It was the other space overwhelming him. The thousands of candles were merging, their light burning away the world. It was the flashbulb of his father's accident and the flashpoint of his own, collapsing into a single, unbearable instant. The girl's face was the last thing he saw. She didn't smile. She just watched, her duty fulfilled. The white light consumed his vision. The sound of the shuffling feet became a roar. Then blackness. Then silence. Then tat. Cold. Marco opened his eyes. He was standing. The pain was gone. The rain was gone. The wrecked car was gone. He was on the road. But it was no longer asphalt. It was dry, packed earth, lit by an unseen, pale moon. He looked down at his hands. They were pale, indistinct. He was surrounded. The faceless procession, the Kalsadan and mga patay, moved around him, their shuffling footsteps the only sound in the dead. Silent world. He tried to cry out. He had no voice. He tried to stop, to plant his feet. He couldn't. His legs were moving, shuffling forward in unison with the others. He was one of them. A small, cold hand slipped into his. He looked down. The little girl was beside him, her blurry face turned forward, walking with him. He had not survived. He had not died. He had been collected, She looked up at him, her voice a final, soft thought inside his new, cold mind. We never stopped walking. What do you think? That final image of the child's handprint, fading on the glass as the light hits it. What do you believe it truly means? What would you do if you were driving alone and heard that single, small bell ringing from the back seat at midnight? In many cultures, particularly in Southeast Asia, a lingering object like a bell, or a persistent image like a handprint, isn't just a memory, it's an anchor. It's believed that a soul, especially one from a sudden or tragic death, can attach itself to an object or a place. The sound isn't a warning, it's a call for witnesses, forcing the living to acknowledge its unfinished business. The theme here is that the light, the morning sun, doesn't offer safety or rescue. It only illuminates the unextinguished fire of the spirit that remains. We want to hear your theories and your own local legends. Does your town have a haunted road, a cursed intersection, or a story everyone whispers about but no one can explain? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss our next investigation. You won't want to be alone for this one. Remember, when the bell rings twice, the road answers.